I just wanted to start by saying hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Defeat Duchenne Canada for our industry partner update today with Italfarmaco. And they're here with us to present some exciting news about their investigational drug Givinostat for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicola Worsfold. I'm the National Vice President of Research, Education, and Advocacy here at Defeat Duchenne Canada. I'm also a Duchenne mom. And before we get started, I just want to start with a couple of housekeeping items. And let me just advance my slides. Here we go. So I just want to ensure that you can clearly hear today's session. So if you would like to test your audio, please click on the up arrow next to the audio button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and this will allow you to adjust your volume level. I also, so right now you'll be muted and your videos will be turned off, and we ask that you keep them off during the presentation. So if you'd like to pose a question, you can put it in the chat option. And so any comments or questions can go in the chat. There'll be plenty of time at the end of the presentation to open it up for Q&A and discussion. So at that point, you can certainly unmute yourself and ask a question live if you would like, or you can continue to post your questions in the chat. I also just want to remind everybody that today's webinar will be recorded. So I just ask that everyone please be mindful about sharing your personal information during the session. You will receive a link to the recording in the next week, so please feel free to share with families and friends who are unable to join us today. It can also be found on our website at defeatduchenne.ca and also on our YouTube channel at Defeat Duchenne. So I just wanted to say a couple of words about the organization, especially for those of you who might be new to Defeat Duchenne Canada. So the organization started about 27 years ago when John and Jessie Davidson founded Jessie's Journey. In 1995, they both set out to walk across Ontario and later John across Canada to raise funds for research and to find a cure. Today, Jessie's Journey is known as Defeat Duchenne Canada, and we have funded $60 million towards research in Duchenne. And in addition, we also provide education like this webinar today, and we support families across Canada. Defeat Duchenne Canada is now a place where families can come to connect with one another, share their experiences, learn from one another, and join our fight to end Duchenne. So if you don't already know us, I encourage you to get to know Defeat Duchenne Canada by checking out our website at defeatduchenne.ca and also signing up for our e-newsletter. And that's a great way to get the most up-to-date information about Duchenne. So I see that we only have a few people online, but let's start the poll. Kate, we have a couple of questions we just wanted to ask our audience. So Kate, if you want to post the first polling question. So the first question is, where are you joining us from today? So just click the answer and we'll give her about a minute to answer. And then Kate, when you can see that most have answered, if you want to share the results. All right, so interesting, we have a lot. So it's about split between Ontario and Alberta with us today. So welcome, Alberta. Thank you for joining us. Our next question is, have you attended a Defeat Duchenne Canada event before? So this is either your first event, perhaps you've attended one of our other webinars or our family forum. Our Canadians Talk Duchenne, which by the way is happening tonight. If any families would like to join us tonight, we will be hosting a session tonight. And our conference, our clinical conference. So we'll just give everyone a few seconds here to answer. All right, let's see. Okay, so we have a few people where this is their first event, and we've had others that have joined our other programs like our family forum and our webinars. So that's wonderful. Thank you. And then our very last question is, what is your connection to Defeat Duchenne Canada? And you may be a parent, you may be an individual living with Duchenne, perhaps you have a relationship with someone who's living with Duchenne, you could be a healthcare provider, patient organization or industry partner. So we'll give everyone a few seconds here to answer. Okay. And all right, so we have a lot of parents with us today. We have a few healthcare practitioners, which is fantastic, and some industry partners. So thank you everyone for joining us. So without further ado, let's get to the reason why we are all here today. I have the pleasure of introducing Italfarmaco. It's a private Italian multinational pharmaceutical company based in Milan. And with us today, we have Ana Christensen, their patient science liaison, and our speaker today is Dr. Paolo Bettica, their chief medical officer. Pablo has worked in research and development for more than 25 years, and he has an extensive list of expertise, including clinical pharmacology, clinical development, people management, neurosciences, endocrinology, metabolism, rheumatology, oncology, and rare disease. So thank you, Pablo, for joining us today. Italfarmaco has been working for many years now on the Givinostat program, which is their investigational drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And Pablo is here today to explain to us what Givinostat is and share their exciting results from their phase 3 trial. So Pablo, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks for the introduction. So let me share my presentation. Okay. So yeah, as Nicola was alluding to, what I'm going to do today is take you through briefly about the mechanism of action of Givinostat, and then actually to present the EPIDIS result. The EPIDIS study is our phase 3 study with Givinostat in Duchenne. So, okay, before doing that, my disclaimer, I'm a full-time employee of Italfarmaco, that is the manufacturer of Givinostat. Givinostat is currently in development for the treatment of Duchenne and Becker and is not approved anywhere in the world, including Canada. And obviously this presentation is for scientific dissemination. Okay, before actually going into the phase 3 result, let me, sorry, maybe we can move this up here. Okay. Let me spend a few moments to describe the mechanism of action of Givinostat. So you are probably well aware about the mechanical role of dystrophin in the muscle fibers, where dystrophin is playing a key role in providing mechanical protection to the muscle fibers. But something which is less known is that dystrophin is actually playing also a key role in the control of the translation of a number of factors which are actually very important for the activation of the regeneration of muscle. And actually this activity is mediated via the control of the HDAC. So when dystrophin is missing, as is a situation in the Duchenne muscle, on one hand you have the, if you want, more frequent muscle damage, and that by itself triggers a number of downstream events, like, for example, inflammation, and then fibrosis and fat infiltration. Within the cell, actually, when dystrophin is missing, the HDAC is actually overworking, and this actually translates in less factors being produced, factors that actually are controlling the regeneration of muscle fibers. So this is the situation in Duchenne, where on one hand you have more damage to the muscle fibers, and on the other hand, also the repairing system doesn't work properly. And the result is obviously the replacement of the muscle fibers by fat and fibrosis. So when we administer Givinostat, what we are doing is really we are obviously unable to restore dystrophin, but we are actually acting on the downstream event of the lack of dystrophin. So on one hand, Givinostat is well known to reduce inflammation and fibrosis. And on the other hand, is also it will control the HDAC activity within the muscle fibers. And as a result of that, there will be a restoration of the production of factors that stimulate muscle regeneration. So as a result of that, in the top hand side, you can see what is the situation in Duchenne, where all these events which I described before, so the tissue damage, the necrosis of the myofibrils, the chronic inflammation, the aberrant adipocyte formation, and the reduced muscle fiber regeneration are then leading to the degeneration of the muscle that you can see here in a muscle biopsy example. And when you give Givinostat, we are actually reducing tissue damage, we are reducing the necrosis of the myofibril, the chronic inflammation, and the replacement by fat and fibrosis, and also we are increasing the muscle fiber regeneration. What I described before in these cartoons is actually the result of studies that we have conducted both in the preclinical model, the MDX model, and these were two studies that we have published. And also then these results were replicated in our phase 2 study in 20 boys treated for 1 year with Givinostat on top of steroids. And as I said, the primary endpoint was looking at the muscle biopsies, and the result which I described before were observed also in the muscle biopsies from these kids. So this study actually stimulated the phase 3 study, the EPID study, and I'm going to describe it now. So it's a randomized, double-blind, parallel group, placebo-controlled. The study was conducted in the US, in Canada, Europe, and Israel. It enrolled 179 male ambulant boys that were randomized 2-to-1. So 2/3 received Givinostat and 1/3 received placebo. These kids were actually followed up for 18 months in total, with a visit to the site at least every 3 months, where we actually measure the function, the strength, and obviously the tolerability of the drug. And also at months 0, 12, and 18, we also performed an MRI. And as you can read here, the objective of the study was to understand whether Givinostat can preserve muscle mass and delay disease progression. At the end of the study, all boys were invited to transition to an open label extension study. And this study is actually still ongoing, and I think it's important to underline that only few boys actually did not move into the open label study. So now we still have more than 200 boys that are still on treatment in the open label study. This is to remind the main selection criteria. So we enrolled boys age 6 and older. They were all ambulant at study start. We did not have any limitation in terms of DMD mutation. So all type of mutation were allowed in the study. And they had to be on stable steroids for at least 6 months. Then within the 179 boys, we selected what we call a target population that was made up of 120 boys. And this was a group on which we analyzed efficacy. And they were selected using functional test and using MRI. to ensure that they would not lose ambulation within the 18 months of the study, but that they would still have some decline, which is obviously important to then show a treatment effect. Okay, in terms of the endpoints that were looked at in the study, the primary endpoint was a change, the mean change in 4-stair climb, so the time that kids take to climb 4 stairs, and we actually analyzed the change between 18 months and baseline value and compare Givinostat versus placebo. Then we also measure a number of other endpoints in the study. Some of them, like the North Star, the time to rise from the floor, and the 6-minute walk test are actually endpoints of function, of muscle function. We measure strength, and we also measure the change in fat fraction in the vastus lateralis muscle of the thigh using magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So let's move then to the result. Before actually going into the endpoints, let me describe what we call the disposition. Therefore, how the patients, the boys that were enrolled into the study were divided. As you can see, we screened 359 boys, 179 were randomized, and of these, 120 were the target population, which I described before, which is key for our efficacy analysis. Of these 120 boys, 81 were randomized to Givinostat and 39 to placebo. And I think an important point to underline is that overall 95% of the boys actually completed the study, which I think is important to underline because that showed actually the solidity of the study. The other important thing to look at, looking at the demography and at the baseline value, is whether the Givinostat and the placebo group were well matched. So if on the baseline value were similar between the two groups. And as you can see here, whether you look at the overall population or at the in-target population, you can see that the value for Givinostat and placebo were actually very similar. So the age on average was 9.5 years. The other important point to discuss is whether they were matched by type of steroids, and the answer is yes. And as you can see, the majority of boys in the study were actually treated with the Deflazacort. And let me also underline that the majority of the boys were on daily treatment. If we look at the baseline value for the different tests that I mentioned before, once again, you can see that the group were actually very similar. And if we look at the 4-stair climb, which is a primary endpoint, you can see that the mean time to climb 4 stairs was 3.4 seconds in the two groups. Then let's move then to the result. This is a primary endpoint. As I said, it is a change from baseline in the 4-stair climb. Here on the left-hand side, you can see the baseline value, once again showing that the two groups were very similar with the 3.5 seconds needed to climb 4 stairs. And then if we look after 18 months, as you can see in the Givinostat group, the time needed to climb 4 stairs went up to 4.5 seconds. And in the placebo group, it went up to close to 6.5 seconds. And the difference between the two groups was calculated being 1.78 seconds. And as you can see, the p-value is less than 0.05. And so the primary endpoint of the study was met. This is a positive study. Then we also looked, as I just mentioned, to a number of other endpoints, and this is what we call the forest plot. So it's one way to present the totality of the result of these endpoints. And the way to read this plot is that if you look all the results, as you see here on the right-hand side, that means that all the tests were favoring Givinostat. And as you can see under the p-value, you can see that some of them were also with a p less than 0.05, namely the Forster climb, which I just mentioned, the total North Star, the cumulative loss of items, and also the vas lateralis fat fraction. But as you can see, also all the others, although not with a p less than 0.05, were actually all favoring Givinostat. So let me go a bit deeper into the North Star and the MRS result, the magnetic resonance spectroscopy results. This is a North Star, as you may remember. This is if you want the assessment of 17 different items, and you can actually look at that in two ways. One is to add up all the results in the different 17 items and calculate a total score, and look at what is the change after 18 months. And as you can see here, the change after 18 months in the Givinostat was a reduction of 2.7 points. And if you look at the placebo, the reduction is approximately 4.5. So the difference is 1.9 points, and with a p-value of 0.02. Another way to look at this test is to look at how many items are being lost. So for each item of the 17 items that I mentioned before, the score can be a 2, which means that the kid can do this function with no problem. A 1, which means that he can actually do the test but needs some help. Or a 0, which means that he is not able to actually perform that specific item. And every time there is a 0, you count it and you add it up. And as you can see, after 18 months, the reduction, the mean reduction in items was of 4.1 items in Givinostat, and it was of 7.4 items in placebo, with a difference of 2.1 items being lost, with a p of 0.02. Moving to the fat fraction, this is one of the two tests that we applied, the MR spectroscopy. Here, in essence, what you do, the machine is actually placing a rectangle on your vastus lateralis image, and then the machine is calculating the amount of fat that is actually present. Here you see two examples, and you see the white means that is fat, while the dark area is actually muscle. So obviously then you calculate a percentage of fat fraction in the image. Here, as you can see, at baseline, the percentage was between 15 and 16% in the two groups, and once again, very similar. And if we look at the result after 72 weeks, so 18 months, you can see that the placebo group went up by approximately 11%, while the Givinostat group went up to approximately 7.5%. And the difference was, once again, the p-value was less than 0.05. Another way to look at that is by using what is called the Dixon MRI. So here, instead of the machine placing the famous rectangle, the operator, so the radiologist, is designing what we call a region of interest, which are this blue or light blue line that you see here. And then once within the region of interest, the machine will calculate the amount of fat being present. And here you see we have pre-selected the vastus lateralis, the biceps femoris, semitendinosus, quadriceps, and hamstring. These are all muscles that are actually key for ambulation. And as you can see, the result is absolutely consistent, meaning that the Givinostat treatment is actually reducing the progression of fat infiltration in this muscle, which let me remind you once again, are actually key for ambulation. Obviously, these studies are also looking at the tolerability of the drug, and this is what we have done. And as you can see, the treatment of the boys with Duchenne actually continues to show a good tolerability profile. The majority of the adverse events were actually mild or moderate in severity. We had only 3 boys that actually dropped out of the study because of an adverse event. If we look at the type of adverse event that were actually observed, the very common drug-related adverse event were diarrhea, reduction in platelets, and increase in triglyceride, namely the adverse event that we were expecting based on the previous experiences. And then also what we have seen is that if we monitor closely the occurrence of this adverse event, and if we adjust the dose when needed, then actually treatment can be continued for a long time with no problem. So in conclusion, as I just described, the EPID study met the primary endpoint with consistent secondary and exploratory endpoints. So all if you're supporting a significant effect of the drug in this disease. And also what we have seen is that the tolerability profile of Givinostat has remained, if you're on a good profile, and also in this study, and that the drug-related adverse event that we have observed were actually the one that we were expecting, and they were actually managed appropriately by monitoring and by dose adjustment. And before actually concluding, let me, if you want to summarize all the evidence that in the last few years we have acquired regarding Givinostat. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the phase 2 study actually has shown a beneficial effect on the muscle using histology, whereas you can see here we have shown an increase in muscle fibers and a reduction in fibrosis. And then with this result, we can actually demonstrate that this microscopic effect, so seen in a small muscle biopsies, is actually replicated by the macroscopic result using MRI, where also here we have shown a slower progression of the, if you want, muscle deterioration. And what we have also shown in this study is that this effect at the muscle level translate into a beneficial effect in terms of function and strength. Before concluding, let me really thank all the boys and the families that have taken part in our studies, all the associations that actually have worked with us in the development of Givinostat, and last but not least, the clinical team that under the leadership of Sara Cazzaniga actually has done this excellent work. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Paolo. This is really exciting news, and congratulations again to Italfarmaco. And once again, thank you to all of the boys and the families who participated in that trial and dedicated their time and energy for the trial. So this is really exciting news. And we're going to open it up to questions now. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. I will read those out loud once they're in. If you want to raise your hand as well and ask a live question, we can certainly unmute you so you can ask your live question as well. So I'm just checking the chat now. I don't see any questions posted yet. But I do have a couple questions for you maybe while we wait. And the first question I have is probably the question that's on many Canadians' minds at this point in time, and that's when might we expect Givinostat to come to Canada? So when might we expect this drug to become available to Canadians?
So as you might expect, the team is actually working very hard to compile the dossier to be submitted to the FDA and the EMA. And we are also now building the plans for the submission also in other countries. So I cannot really give you an exact timing, but be reassured, obviously, that the team is working very hard to make sure that we can provide actually Givinostat, if approved, obviously, to the boys as soon as possible.
Excellent. Okay, that's great to hear. I guess that would bring me to my next question, which would be for those families that have participated in the trial and continue to participate in that open label study. Will they still continue to receive drug until until it's available or there's access in their country?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So all the boys in the open label study will continue to receive treatment until the Givinostat is approved and put on the market in any given country. So until that happens, they will continue to receive the treatment.
That's fantastic. That's great news to hear. My last question, and as we wait for some more to come in from our audience, was the trial was focused obviously in younger boys who were ambulant. Do you have any plans at all to study Givinostat in older boys who are non-ambulant or who can't walk?
So the answer is yes. And by the way, for the if you're on European regulations, we have to prepare what is called a pediatric investigational plan. Okay. That is actually mandatory for any dossier which is being submitted. And part of that plan is actually two studies. One is in non-ambulant boys, and the other one is in boys from 2 to 6 years of age. Okay. So that will come. Obviously, we are now working on these plans. So you'll probably hear from us in the next few months about these two new studies.
That's really great to hear. So we will definitely be keeping a close eye on that. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's my question. So I just want to open it up one last time to our audience members. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question about Givinostat? Anna, did you have anything you might? Oh, hang on. We just got a question. So, go ahead. Okay, I'll read the question out. It's from Joanna Abrahams. She says, I'm just wondering what happens if we're living somewhere where it perhaps doesn't get approved. So say it gets approved in Europe, but not in Canada. Would those in the open label study still receive access, or would access end at that time?
No, actually, they will still receive access. So as I mentioned before, so in essence, treatment will be provided until the treatment is being approved in every specific country. So obviously, if we have a boy who is in Canada, until the drug is approved in Canada, they will still continue to receive the treatment within the open label study.
That's wonderful news. Great. Anna, go ahead. Did you?
Yeah, so we were just at the PPMD conference, and Paolo, one of the questions that lots of families had was, how is Italfarmaco thinking about this in terms of combination therapies? Do you think that it would be helpful in some way in the future for people who've had gene therapy or exon skipping or things like that? Can you say a little bit more about how this mechanism of action might fit in there?
So, I mean, we know perfectly well that combination is something that would be very important in the future. So once we have obviously new treatment approved as a single agent, then the next immediate step will be combination. And this is certainly applicable also to Givinostat, also because given the type of mechanism of action, namely the effect on the downstream events of the lack of dystrophin, clearly combination with other treatment that might be working at different levels of the disease in Duchenne is certainly logical and certainly something that we will be looking at in the future.
But that's something that you would study after Givinostat gets approved in certain countries. Obviously, it wouldn't be just because I know families often think about timing and when things might happen. Hearing you talk, it sounds like that your team would be working towards regulatory approvals and then look at studies like that. That's not something you would do sooner than that, correct?
Yeah, this is absolutely correct. I mean, I think it's important, obviously, we would all want to have Givinostat given to everybody or combined with whatever possible. But I think we need to now be, remain focused and really try and work to make this treatment become available to the DMD boys as soon as possible. Then obviously that will expand to many other possibilities that we will be working on.
That's great, though. That's wonderful news. I'm just checking to see. It doesn't appear to have any other questions in the chat. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Paolo. I really appreciate Italfarmaco taking the time to present this to our Canadian community. And this is really exciting news. So we're just really, really thrilled about this. I know this is very exciting for a lot of our families worldwide. So thank you so much. I just want to, if I can share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop.
Sure. Oh, here we go. Okay, can you see my screen there?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, perfect. So I guess with this, let's close out this meeting. And I just wanted to remind everyone who is on the call with us today, if you wouldn't mind just taking a few moments to fill out our evaluation. These evaluations are really important because it does help us, it helps us decide, what types of educational programs that we can continue to provide to our community that that are meaningful to you. So just take a few seconds to fill out the evaluation. And with that, I just want to say a big thank you for everyone for joining us today. We hope that you'll get involved with Defeat Duchenne Canada, whether it'll be, helping us raise funds for your local community, sharing your story to raise awareness, becoming an advocacy ambassador, donating, volunteering, or simply joining the conversation on social media. And don't forget that you can subscribe to our e-newsletter to hear the latest to hear the latest news, on research, advocacy, and education at defeatduchenne.ca. So with that, I will say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicola. Thanks a lot to everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Anna. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.